So my name is indeed Stephanie Llamas. I am from SuperData Research. We're a market research firm out in New York that covers all segments of digital gaming and playable media. So I'm really excited to have such great panelists on stage today. I'm going to run through some market sizing so that, to give context to what we're going to be talking about. And then I'll let these guys take the show because they have some great experience to share. So to start with, the mobile games industry is quite large, as you know, worldwide. It's grown almost 10% year over year. And we're seeing a lot of growth coming from Asia. Asia accounts for more than half of the worldwide mobile games industry. And as we see some emerging markets like India, Indonesia kind of come into the fold, we're seeing growth. But we're also still seeing growth from major markets like Japan, Korea, and China, which is what we're here to talk about. So more than a fifth of the worldwide market of revenue just comes from China. So it's quite a large market. It's still growing, and it's a large piece of Asia's market as well. So if we look at year-over-year growth, we're seeing some slowing of growth in the market, but we're still seeing growth. So we expect it to reach $6 billion in revenue by 2017, up almost $1 billion from this year. So the first thing that you kind of need to understand when looking at the Chinese market is they have quite a few Chinese players. About 3/4 of the Asian mobile games audience comes from China, but just 40% of the revenue comes from China. So the reason that we see this is we have highly active players that are not spending quite as much as their counterparts in Asia. So at $19 of average revenue per paying user, and the conversion rate is about 3%. It's quite a bit lower than we're seeing in a market like Japan, for example, where revenue is accounting for roughly half. So about 50% versus China's 40%, with just 13% of Asia's audience. And so spending is quite a bit higher in order to compensate for that participation. They're spending 3 times what Chinese players are spending at a rate more than 3 times higher. And if we look at the United States as sort of a benchmark, a control, we see it somewhere in the middle. So here in the United States, we see spenders spending about $26. So it's still more than the Chinese spender, but it's at a much higher rate as well, over 5% versus China's 3%. So thinking about how Chinese spenders perform, how they play, and their behavior, there are other things when considering taking your game to China that you need to keep in mind. And, I'm just going to sort of list some of these things, but these guys are the ones that are really going to get to the heart of it. So as most of you know, and as the previous presenter mentioned, there's a lot of fragmentation throughout China. And so navigating that is really important and understanding how. Also, localization is not just about changing the language of your game, it's about changing your game for the Chinese audience. And through that, doing so with local partners is going to be key, but understanding how to find those local partners that's kind of the challenge that we'll address. As I mentioned, spending, being lower than average in terms of developed markets, monetization is going to be key in understanding how to monetize for this unique market. And finally, user acquisition is really important, but it's really different from what we're seeing in Western markets. And so understanding how you need to develop partnerships that can help with UA and how that differs from what we're used to here is essential. So I'm going to stop hogging the mic. I'm going to hand it over to these guys. So I want to just introduce everyone quickly. They're not quite in the order that's listed above, and we are missing someone, but we'll start with Phil, who's to my right. Philip Aronson is the founder of QDog Productions. He has 20 years experience working directly with China, and through his company, he's successfully represented studios by securing licensing agreements in the Chinese mobile game space. Next, we have Jung Su, who is from Yodo One Games. He is the VP of Global Publishing. He has 20 years of experience in the games industry, and he manages global publishing at Yodo One with a game portfolio that includes successes like Crossy Road and Ski Safari. And finally, we have Mikael Leinonen, the CEO and co-founder of MyGamez Limited. Mikael has lived and worked in China since 2004, and his company has turned successful Western games like hill climb racing into major hits in China. So to start with, since I started with this when mentioning the challenges in the presentation, I think understanding the fragmentation in app stores is really key. Some people get that, but maybe you guys can kind of walk through what you've seen and in terms of not only just the fragmentation across the app stores, but OS. You have different OSs in China. It's not just Android and iOS, as I understand it. So maybe, Jung, we can start with you. Can you talk just about your experience with those different app stores in the Chinese market versus the West?
Sure. So, as most people probably know, Google doesn't really officially exist inside of China, so therefore Google Play doesn't exist. And replacing Google Play is probably about 300 other separate app stores, none of which talk to each other or allow traffic to exchange. So you can imagine that they're very siloed entities. Probably 8 to 10 of them really sort of drive 70% of the revenue for the Android marketplace. And amongst that, there are hundreds of different multiple Android devices that you have to test across. But the real challenge for most developers is to be on these app stores, you need to integrate their payment SDKs, which are all very separate, always written in Chinese. You've got the 3 carriers, so they've got one-click billing, which needs to be integrated. So you got to imagine having to integrate for every single key partner. So imagine at least the 10, but then the next bottom 20. So that's a significant amount of work for particularly an indie studio of a few people, let alone a medium-sized studio. So there's fragmentation in the marketplace, and then beneath that is a fragmentation of actually distributing correctly and producing those games. So that really becomes a huge challenge. And one of the things you mentioned was about revenue being lower on the Chinese side. There's a direct correlation. So one is, I think, economics, right? The discretionary income levels are still lower than, say, Japan or Korea. But more importantly, some of the other revenue streams that are much more mature, say, in the Western markets, such as videos, incentivized videos, ad installs, all those things that drive a significant portion of revenue outside of IAP purchases, they're not very functional inside the Android marketplace. Infrastructure, bandwidth, 4G is just sort of rolling out in the major cities, let alone the rest of China. But then again, the app stores don't talk to each other, so where do you point people when they click on incentivized video to download? So you're missing a huge chunk of that ecosystem on the revenue side, which then lowers the overall revenue for the region. So, looking down the road, we see some consolidation and things like that will happen. But that whole thing has to change and evolve, and that's where, our companies and our teams help developers sort of reach maturity in those fragmented ecosystems.
Right, definitely. Yeah, so you mentioned that advertising is not quite what we see in other markets. Can some of you talk a little bit about what the advertising ecosystem is like there, and if it's something that publishers take advantage of and see any significant revenue from?
Yeah, I could. From our side, it's pretty clear. Strictly no ads. So all our games we publish on Android, there is 0 ads. And the reason is just like Jung said, the major app stores, they are all competing against each other, and they would not allow any advertisement that could possibly take the user from their store and drive it to the other store. So we do cross-promotion among our own portfolio, but we have to do it in a way that, for example, in say Xiaomi store, the user will be directed to Xiaomi store to download the new game. So that's why we haven't yet found an outside advertising, third-party advertising provider that could cover the Android stores in a healthy way. So that's why we are just looking for games that can really monetize with the in-app purchases.
I can add to that. Let me turn this on. Hello? So I just want to add to that, and both those comments, well said, but with regard to advertising, and it's not that the consumer in China doesn't want to be advertised to. As a matter of fact, where here in the West, where I see a banner ad, you know, I'm numb to it, right? Like a lot of us are. They come across our screen, we don't pay attention, we kind of move on. But there's an affinity to be advertised to in China, but just not necessarily in game. Certainly not during gameplay, which, you know, taking a player out of the game is like, you know, no way, you're trying to monetize that person. But the ad networks in China tend to focus their efforts on utility apps where, and go for high profile consumer good products. Like, you know, BMW wants to advertise on, you know, an investment news app as opposed to, you know, a match 3. It's like they want to hit their consumers specifically. A lot of the ad networks in China being performance based, and I actually was in that ad tech space for a while, specifically helping a company build that out in China. And, you know, what we find is that the effective CPMs for game advertising is so low, and it's almost not worth it. They're blocked in many cases. I think maybe GFON doesn't block it and whatnot. So it's not that advertising is not warranted, right? China, you know, the mobile screen is that first screen, right? It's most people's way to connect with a lot that's going on. And I remember there was a news article that said, you know, 2 people kind of sitting next to each other. One got a BMW ad or an Audi ad, something like that, and his friend was like angry that, hey, how come they didn't advertise to me? But again, game is not the place necessarily to monetize, in which in turns why there's lower revenue as compared to, you know, here in the West, because it's in-app purchases that really drive your monetization, drive your revenue ultimately.
So, you know, with that in mind, recently Jeff Linden from iDreamSky had mentioned that he felt like Western publishers thought too much about the creative and not enough when they're designing their games about the monetization aspect. And so you were talking about how advertising is not the way to go. In-app purchases are really important. So, you know, when thinking about your game, especially if you've developed it for alternative markets, what are the things you need to keep in mind when designing your game specific to monetizing a Chinese audience?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to really understand whether you are building a new game for Chinese market or taking your existing game to Chinese market, that it really doesn't monetize with the ads. So if you don't see the conversion in the Western markets for people to spend on the IAP, then I would strongly consider not going to China with that game, or at least be prepared to make some major changes on the monetization design. Because I mean, we have cases where on the bright side, we have cases where we have taken Western game to China, and it's actually monetizing better on IAP than it does in the West. So the ARPU on the in-app purchase is higher in China compared to West. But then we have games that are just not converting. They are not converting in West. They are not converting in China either. And those games are not generating any revenue in China. So that's really important to really understand that if there is no conversion, then there's no revenue at all. Yeah, having said that, then I think there are a lot of differences in the monetization designs in the games in China and with Western and Chinese consumer seems to be more adaptive to very aggressive monetization. It's like they are you can really throw things on their face and get them to pay in a lot of different ways that Western audiences would perhaps find annoying or too aggressive.
So I think I come from a production background, so when we as a company look at a game, we specialize in co-production, so we're bringing in a lot of Western games into China as well as publishing globally. But fundamentally, for all games, it needs to be fun. So I don't think you should remove that core element of a fun game, right? Disregard this notion about monetization and whatnot. The game one needs to be fun. If it's not fun, all the other things won't really matter. But specific to China, there really is some things that are very different. Art style, obviously, from a production perspective, is different. So if you look at Korean or Japanese art style, they're a much closer template to what might succeed in Asia, in China specifically. Things like tutorials, for example, in China, the gamer wants to be held firmly through the tutorial process, whereas in the West, we generally tend to like escape and want to just jump right into the game. If you do that too early with the Chinese audience, they'll sort of lose their way and then pop out and your retention numbers will drop. In terms of monetization, yes, in general, we see most Chinese gamers, they monetize earlier than later, whereas in the West, we tend to want to like even out that curve so that monetization happens throughout the whole LTV cycle. And there are a lot of other things that really, really matter, but again, in terms of what really impacts success in China, like you have to look at the culture, what kind of historical, characters there are, the type of media that they watch, things like that. You can't release a game that's based on King Arthur, Westerns, things that really kind of resonate for us in the Western market but has no cultural references, right? So if you're planning on building a game that's a global game and you're focusing on China, you really have to address that market in particular. So,
I think in general, studios, developers go into the game with some preconceived, notions, right? The creative side really stimulates the development of the game, and I don't think that's, just talking about China, just in general. Like, why are you building a game? Like, what are the reasons for it? And obviously, I think for most people, the reasons are to monetize an audience, to make money. I mean, there's generally nothing altruistic about, what anyone's doing, and I guess in some cases it is, and if you know that about yourself, that's fantastic. But I think you need to. I speak with I don't work for a particular company, right? I choose to speak with studios and guide them down a path that I think represents, the needs of them as individuals and what will help them sort of understand market. China's just another market, right? So if it's a market, then you need a business plan that resonates with that particular market, and that means aligning yourself with somebody who understands that and is willing to sort of take you down that road and not really hide it in some cloud of mystery that, it's too complicated, you don't understand. And I think part of that comes down to cultural differences, an unwillingness to sort of not say, I don't know something, right, because that would be just sort of uncomfortable for them in China. Language barrier that makes it difficult for them to communicate certain value propositions, so they just assume that if it's too complicated for you and we can't really explain it clearly to you, we're just going to leave it sort of in the dark. So I think it's important that you find partners that can help you build out that strategy and that are willing to share information with you. So like you build your game, right, and you're building in your KPIs. You're building in the structure that will generate revenue, and you have the technical ability to manage, manipulate, balance, whatever to fit a certain market. Now, obviously, certain games in the West are not going to reflect positively in China for various reasons. But conversely, it's like if that's the case, then why are most of your games pulled from Google Play, like right after they're launched and pulled into the Chinese market? Not because they're not right? It's because there's some creative element to those games that resonates with somebody in China, and they want to take advantage of that thing. So I think that the goal for you as developers, studios, people who invest in game development should be finding a partner that is willing to sort of be open and honest with you about what those challenges are. Yeah, it's complicated. Great, it's complicated for a lot of reasons, but it's like in the States here, when you go to find a publisher, it's not like you open the phone book. I don't know if anyone actually has ever opened a phone book here, the paper thing that you actually look up stuff in, but it's not like you open up the phone book and go, Acme publisher, I'm going to choose them blindly, right? You do your due diligence. You're running a business. That applies to your efforts in any other global market. Like, you have to do your homework, and you have to be comfortable with who you select to help you. I don't have all the numbers in my head. First, I'm 50 years old. I can't remember half the stuff. And secondly, I'm more interested in just guiding somebody down that path of knowledge. It's like, be a teacher. Give them what they need to help them feel comfortable. I choose to represent a company called Smartians AG in China, Sinamogo, just because I think it represents a near frictionless path to publishing in China. But everyone has a value, right? Like, work with somebody that you just feel comfortable with. Not me, it doesn't matter, but you can't have all the answers yourself, but you're building a game, it's a business, think about how you're gonna build that game. And that applies obviously to China, more so than it does maybe here in the West, but it's not that much different, right? Things are different, but the underlying component is about the same. Be smart with your decisions.
Right,
Don't
so
be
a lot of that
cavalier.
has to do with trust, right? There's a mutual trust that you need to form between, you need to gain the trust of the partner that you have in China, and they need to gain your trust as well. So, how do you...
I learned that from making every mistake like you could possibly make working with Chinese partners. And not just in the gaming space. Like, I'm from New York, I yell, I cut you off when you speak, and I type in capitals. Like, everything that you could possibly do wrong.
Very American.
Yeah, right, exactly. So everything you could possibly do wrong, I did, but that was 20 plus years ago, and so at least I learned from it. And so now I'm able to apply those positive experiences, and quite frankly, everyone talks about China as being this horrible, tough, impossible place. Some of my best friends I met over the years in China, and forming that relationship and building that level of trust, I would trust them with anything. You can get ripped off here just as easily you can get ripped off in China. None of us would be sitting up here if we thought China was a bad market. And no one would be sitting here if we thought only the top 5 games make any money. Everyone should leave. Everyone should walk out of this room, because if you don't have a top 5 game, if AAA, you're not gonna make any money. That's just not true. You just need to be able to enter into that market in such a way that protects you and protects your intellectual property from a negative experience. And I think that is the first thing that you have to address. It's like, how do I do this without feeling that, my core objective, which is to build my business in the West, is not completely sapped and my bandwidth is sucked up because I'm focusing so heavily on how to get through this China experience. Find a partner that can help you do that and take the pressure off you.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it's really important to realize that you need to find a partner that suits you, because there are studios with one man and a dog, and there are studios with the hundreds of people, huge resources, and every game is different. There is no one formula that could match all. I mean, there are games that can be successful in China with almost zero localization. Just switch the billing mechanism and adjust the price level and do the language translation, and that's it, and it will be hugely successful in China. And there are games that require tons and tons of changes to be successful in China. And you need to realize what are your own resources, what are your goals in China, how much you are willing to make changes to the game, how much you are willing to put effort on coming up with the updates, etc., and find a partner who supports that strategy, instead of thinking that everybody has to do China in the same way. Supercell, they launched the Clash of Clans in iOS China by themselves, just with the translations, and it was hugely popular. I mean, they're at the top of the charts, and there are a lot of other examples where Western game has succeeded in China with a very minimal effort, and at the same time there are games that just can't make it, even with the big localization. So case by case, really.
Yeah, so when you're talking to partners in China as a developer out here, you might be getting a lot of different advice in terms of how you're localizing. So, what do you listen to? How do you know what partners are going to help your game the most for the Chinese audience?
I would suggest. Think about it. I'm like a little delay. So, I guess in my experience, right? So when I first got into this business, I did the traditional deals for people. Got them MG, really excited. It was good money. People were like, cool, couple of cool titles, couple of like fun titles, but nobody knew who they were. And then it was like, okay, so now I'm running a business and I'm slogging through a 9 to 12 month, and I could show people contracts like, signed on this day, published a year later. And I think that was because they took the game with the mindset that you had to do everything to make this game relevant in that market. And quite frankly, again, I mentioned the company, Smartians that I've kind of gravitate to, because my opinion sort of aligns with theirs. Like, do as little as possible. Don't do everything, and don't sit there and kill yourself spending money on localizing and sapping up your resources to when there's no guarantee of success. And I think one of the key factors of success is to beat out the piracy, right? To get there faster than they are, to establish your KPIs, and to tap into the social economics of publishing in China. So I think everyone's got a different opinion. I think yesterday's conversation was you get 20% of the revenue, and you got to spend $200,000, and I'm like, 90 studios that I speak with out of 100 don't have $200,000 to invest in localizing and culturalizing, and then they said, well, it'll cost you $3 million, but it's cheaper to have the people in China do it. I think there's a lot of complexity thrown at people, and that I think it scares a lot of people. I think if you have a good game, if you have a game already that's monetizing in the West, and you have good KPIs, and you understand that, and you do some things to the game to address the Chinese market, you have to localize it for monetary reasons, for understanding reasons, but I would suggest that you don't rebuild your whole game. Don't use it as a wireframe and then try to make a new game for China. I just don't know that that's really necessary all the time.
So, slightly different opinion on this, but from a high level, as a developer, you obviously need to do the homework and talk to everybody. Talk to all the big publishers out there. And then also network within the development community. Most developers will have an opinion on partners that they've worked with. So then you have a valuable sort of social network where you can ask people about their success stories or their pain points in working with a partner. From our business perspective, for Yoda One's business, when we do a partnership, we actually do all the localization, culturalization. We do all that work on the engineering side. So I don't know where people are spending $200,000 of their own money, but you shouldn't be. We do all the work, and that's the role of a value add that a publisher should bring to the table. We're the ones who are local experts in the China market. Therefore, you shouldn't be out of pocketing it, right? So that's absolutely not the right relationship you should be building in the China market. So again, do the homework, talk to people. And I think key things are that, one, that the teams gel, right? Both sides of the team, the China team and your team, and that the culture fits, right? Because game production as a whole, as a process, is part science, part magic. And if you don't have that aspect correct, and you're not communicating, language isn't an issue. And in fact, culturalization shouldn't be an issue. We have a lot of bilingual staff that aren't just Chinese people who speak English, but Americans who speak Chinese. And so we both have cultural reference points when people talk about something being fun in the West. It's not just an abstract notion of it, but yeah, the American kids understand it and are able to convey that message internally to our teams.
Yeah, hi, Alfredo from Kick9. And I also want to add to that, I think it's great points. And essentially, when you're finding your partner, and it's very important that you guys also maybe share a lot of the same philosophies and the means of bringing the title to the China market. And also, I think it's very open. You should be very open to maybe not necessarily criticisms, but ways to improve your title. As an example, even bringing games from east to the west. It's not uncommon for developers to do a lot of soft launches, making sure their drop rates and game mechanics and assets, are suitable to the market. So, being part of that stage, collecting a lot of data during the early stages can really help, you improve your title during the official launch phase. So I would say that's another maybe a very important aspect. And then I think just they hit on a lot on it is basically finding a partner. Everyone has a different need and a different value. For Kick9, we're at a stage right now where we're targeting more mid-tier and larger tier studios. But the idea is we want to help them penetrate the market and kind of offer a full valued service. And then along those lines, with those learnings, you can basically pass it along to smaller and indie developers. And basically, there's a chance and an opportunity for everyone, and there's always a good partner who can add a lot of value to your title.
Great. Did you have any, did you want to add anything? Okay. So one of the things then is, a lot of times you're sending your IP over to these partners in China, and now they have it. And, kind of goes back to that trust issue. So what are the things that you need to consider before you let go of something like that to someone else, in China? I mean, part of it is that you're establishing a trustful relationship, but how do you know that your IP is going to be safe when you're handing it over?
Well, I think the first question to consider is whether you want to hand it over or not.
Right.
So, like our model is that the developer always stays in a full control of their IP. So we've got just one SDK, you can call it like a super SDK that provides the billing in every single channel. We are currently publishing in around 50 different stores. So the developer only needs to integrate one SDK and maintain one build for the Android market, and that just reduces the workload so much that practically every developer can do that workload themselves. And same for localization. We provide the guidance, the localization design, but then the developer implements it. So in our model, the developer stays in full control of their source code, their IP, but then there are publishers who are kind of providing the full service. They take the source code and do the localization on your behalf, do the integrations, and etc. And that can work as well, as long as you find somebody who you can trust.
Yeah, I just want to add, so I'm not in control of the time it takes for it to go on. So similar to MyGamez, so Smartians through Sinamogo, and you have to have Chinese people right on the ground. You need that understanding. But their model being similar in that passing off source code, as you're all well aware, is a nerve-wracking thing. It's like you gave birth to something, and now I'm going to give you everything that you need, and I'm going to trust that you're not going to make multiple copies of it that aren't part of our contract that I'm never going to know, and all those things. So Smartians uses what I always refer to as that super SDK as well, and all the payment and billing integration, it's done, and they also handle the localization and culturalization, the promotion, their team on the ground, working directly with the stores. I think so, but I speak with a lot of people who are like, who say to me essentially, I need carrier billing right away, and I got to be on 360, and I want to be over the head. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to hammer you over the head, and I want to get. And I caution people right away. I said, well, the likelihood is if you demand that you want that carrier billing and you want to be in front of those big stores right away, and you haven't established your KPIs, the moment you turn on that carrier billing, they could see that you don't have the KPIs. If you don't meet their revenue standards and you get a poor rating on something quickly, well, there are like no second chances, right? So your game is probably not going to get promoted. So, in my opinion, it's intelligent and thoughtful to maybe kind of go in more stealthily and maybe go to not those top, top 30 stores, top 10 stores, whatever. You're not dealing with 300 stores, right? So like top 30, go into those, kind of those second tier stores stealthily, turn on SMS, use just SMS billing, which is it's only 2.5% versus a 30% VIG. So if you're actually generating revenue, you're keeping a bigger share of it. You're able to build those KPIs. Social is so big in China. Key opinion leaders, KOPs, are critical to getting that boost and building a base for your game. And so it's like, I want to be the guy that sits there and someone like 360 comes to me and says, I want your game, not please take my game. So if you can build a strong base, it's like that pyramid, right? Like when you're building your business, what do? You kind of fill the bottom with as much good concrete as you can so it doesn't crumble. So kind of build that base, build that support, build that social connection in the market, and then go to that next stage, and someone like Smartians gravitates towards that model and using their own SDK but not sharing your source code. So you're in control. They do and help you with all the localization and culturalization. They take it on, right? They have people that are good at it, so why not let them do it? And I think that's probably a model for people to consider. Again, every model is relevant. It's what's best for you. Maybe I'm like a salesman with going towards water, and I take that path of least resistance, and I think that model represents the path of least resistance for people. And the safety. the safety that people sort of covet and want to have with regard to their source code.
Right. So a couple things that you mentioned that I thought were interesting were, the things that will kill your app in terms of marketing and the things that can help them. So, having those bad reviews, you're not going to get promoted. But then also on a social side, if you can leverage that really helps. So can you guys maybe touch upon a few points as to what the developers can do on their end to help with user acquisition? Because I know a lot of you guys and Chinese partners will take that on, but what is it that they need to consider when they're trying to acquire new users?
Yeah, I can field a piece of this. So basically, user acquisition in China, there's a few different methods to accomplish this. First is you do want to work with the stores directly, and generally it's much like here, Apple and Google, it's algorithm based. There, it's more based on the store's manager. So you can say the rankings are selected by their team. So if you're just looking for organic installs, that relationship with each store is very important. When it comes back to user acquisition, generally a lot of the game developers will host the game independently, like NetEase or the very large public companies in China, and essentially try to acquire users into the game directly by hosting the game independently. And the benefit for them is, here, no one essentially takes a cut. Like the stores take a fee, just like here at Google, Apple, it was 30%, there maybe 50 plus. And the benefit for them is they will incorporate third-party payment methods, and basically they can keep maybe 95% of the share. So that's an option which we also advise our developers that we work with to publish in China. One way is going directly with the stores. The other is publishing the game on your own server and acquiring users that way using the various different ad channels.
I think sorry, did you want to go? From a development and production perspective, trying to maximize your exposure, things like file size. So for example, most of China is still 3G, maybe even less than that. Yeah, I live in Shanghai, which is a tier 1 city, and that has 4G. It's pretty spotty. Wi-Fi is still not prevalent. So when game development studios come with like a 400 megabyte game, it's tough. We've become experts at optimizing things. We want to be maybe 50, 75 megs, and then post that, then they think, oh well, we'll stream the rest, but a lot of the consumers at that end of that level, they have 100 megabyte maximum on a monthly basis. So you're capping out on these things. So, when developing games, you got to think about these sort of like technical issues. On the social network side, Facebook doesn't exist; it's banned there. So you can't rely just on Facebook. A good publishing partner should be able to give you access to all the local Chinese social network sites. Our SDKs, I'm sure everyone else is here, integrates directly into all the major SNS portals and allows that. But more importantly, I think from a game design perspective, you really want to build social and as part of the whole game loop, right? Regardless of whether it's within the Western hemisphere or you're targeting China, but those things have to be built in, and that's where a good publishing partner will also help you on the game design side. Of our 300 employees or so, 80% of our staff is development. It's engineers, artists, designers. We do that work for you. So as you explore opportunities with other partners and you build the trust and you talk to other people, you really want to make sure that if you're a 2-3 person team or even a mid-sized studio, that you're able to leverage the manpower, the resources, the expertise, design skills that are very relevant for the China market, right? And those are the sort of the basic things you're going to have to do to really make the game at least launch properly. And then beyond that, there's a lot of other things.
Yeah, a lot of good points. And adding to that, if you have resources to come up with the frequent content updates, that's really helpful because, well, number one is that you need to have, again, the conversion there. If you have a decent ARPU, then the channels, the app stores will be willing to feature your game. And on Android stores, featuring is everything in China. At least per our experience, we get easily 95% of our users through the store featurings. And once we launch the game, there's always the sales job for us to make the game look good so that the channels will want to give it a featuring. But the first week, first 2 weeks, they will keep looking at the metrics, and if the conversion is not there, they will just stop featuring it. So one thing, I mean, number one, have the ARPU there in a decent level before you do like a hard launch, and then number two, updates on a decent game always get the featuring. So that goes without negotiation almost with the stores, that when we come up with the content updates, they will give us a little bit of featuring, and that always helps.
Great. So I want to make sure that the audience gets a chance to also ask you questions. So does anybody have any questions for our panelists? I have tons of questions left. So yeah, over there. So do we have a mic for everyone?
Hi, I have a question about limited launch. There was some mentioning about it earlier. And as Western developers are used to doing a limited launch in different countries, that KPI may reflect well for the US market. For China specifically, how do you suggest that developers do limited launch and the tuning and the testing?
Just pick one of the really small app stores. And really small is probably like 1 million or 2 users in China. And you can do a test on that. But I mean, it really depends. If it's a game that's already been out in the market, then your metrics should be reflected, right? And the 3 key ones that we really look for is retention, conversion, and then monetization. You want to make sure you're not losing customers, because you know, if you're spending money, don't leak the customers. Once you've made sure that happens, then conversion, right? How are they converting? 2%, 1%? Obviously 2% or higher is best, right? And then we can talk about monetization. If the game hasn't been launched anywhere, then if you're going to do geo-testing somewhere else and outside of China, that's great, that's helpful. But if it's specifically something you want to do inside of China, then you would probably pick one of the smaller stores to get some data. And then publishers should help you with that, right? That's all part of the process, because the big guys, as everyone's mentioned, it's all hand-to-hand BD combat. Like, you have to have the relationships with them, you have to get it in front of them. They feature it. If the numbers don't work out, they pull it down. There's really not a whole lot of leeway to go any other way. So before approaching the big guys, you want to make sure you test out on some of the smaller app stores.
And I think that's actually really nice that we have so many Android channels in China, so that
really?
we can, in that sense, that we can afford to actually have several limited soft launches. So launch it in this channel once, and if you're not happy with the numbers, then work on the game and launch it in another channel again. And the previous speaker before the panel was saying that, I think it was NetEase, that they publish on a iOS first and try to get the heat there, and then get the Android stores to want the game. But it works the other way as well. You can keep honing the game in the Android stores first before you do your hard launch on iOS.
I think we were just saying that. So hide as long as you can, right? Don't expose yourself to the carriers until you're comfortable with the numbers and the balancing mechanics and whatnot. And you've had that chance to sort of play with things a little bit and to kind of build that, like I said, that base before you then turn on to the to the bigger set of eyes out there and greater exposure. So I think we're all saying basically the same thing. It's like do it stealthily. Be smart about it. Don't put yourself in a position where it's like you made one wrong step. They saw you make the wrong step. There's so much choice out there for them that they're just not going to pay attention to you.
Yeah, and also like one alternative option also is we found for some of our soft launches, or you can say beta phase, we did a lot of social media. Like we see that like a lot of users from Tencent or other social apps gravitate towards our early builds, especially if there's some kind of IP associated with them. So it's not uncommon to have a few thousand users come to your game and play and collect data that way. Whereas opposed to the US, we're more common to launching a game in maybe Canada or New Zealand. So it's also another option which worked relatively well for us.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Oh, great.
Just really a follow on from that. If you soft launch on a channel, do you see issues of piracy hurting you?
That's a good point.
I guess the piracy issue is
Yeah,
like,
I mean, there's piracy there, but I think in respect to China, actually the climate's changing. There's a lot more concern around IP ownership, both from within China and because big brands are there and there's a big business there. Your partner should be helping you out with that. So, for example, at Yodelwan, we have a full ops team that 24/7, all they do is look for pirated copies of the game. Because in reality, most of the app stores or the websites that carry pirated copies of the games, actually, half the time they don't really know that it's the pirated version. So we ask them to take that down, and in return we give them the legitimate copy, which then allows them to actually generate more revenue. Most consumers actually want, it's not like Chinese population wants to get copycats or a lesser quality product. They want the original thing, but they may not necessarily know how to get it. So it's actually a pretty good situation when we find a pirated copy. We ask them to take it down, we give them the legitimate version, they get better revenue, our partner gets more money, and the customer is happier. So it's changing actually pretty significantly.
Just to add to that, so with the piracy issue, and suggested that your game's here in the West, and and if it's a decent game and whatever, and it's pulled right automatically, like a lot of stores just pull it. So there's piracy sort of from the get-go, and how do you mitigate some of the negative impact that piracy could have? And some of that impact would be, it pulled in there, it's not functioning right, there have been no changes, it's getting a bad rating, you're not making any revenue. So I think speed to market is a critical component to mitigating that negative impact that piracy is, sort of, presents to you. So I mean, I get that's one thing, right? It's like, but like you said, it's like in New York City, you can stand along on a street corner and buy a bogus LV pocketbook, right? But in China, they want the real thing, and that applies to games and the originality of things. It's
Piracy is also in the West. Like we publish Crossy Road. I don't know, like there's 20 Crossy X something
Sure.
on the iOS store and on the Android store. It's in the Western market, so it really is about, do they really impact your business, and do you want to go out and chase them, right? And the ones that do, we go out and chase them and make sure that they get pulled down. You don't want to confuse your brand.
Yeah. One of the advices I give to the developers is that if possible, perhaps you can launch your Android version in China first. Make sure it's in all the relevant stores before you publish it on Google Play, so that can minimize a little bit. It will not stop the piracy. It will always be there, but that can slow it down a little bit. But having said that, when we published Hill Climb Racing, the legit version in China, the piracy version had been there for 1.5 years already, and there was dozens of different versions, and it didn't slow us down. Within the first year, we got over 40 million downloads for the legit version. I don't know if it would have been higher if there was no pirate versions, but all the stores, when we work with them, they are, like Jung said, they are very happy to replace the piracy version with the legit version, because the legit one is the one that brings them revenue.
Right. So how much time do we have left?
Got 5 minutes or so.
Okay, great. So
Hi, thanks. This has been really helpful. My question is actually about some of that. You said social media is really important. So when you have your game and you're ready to really get it out there, what are the best ways to go about promoting it with social media, with the key opinion makers that you mentioned, Phil, and then also just with the unique Chinese media? How does that? What are the best ways to do that?
don't try to do it on your own. These are partners, right? They know. That Sina Weibo and WeChat and Tencent's, Qzone, that those are relevant social platforms, and they know in the gaming space, you have local people on the ground who know those key opinion leaders. It's like anything else, right? You come here, you work a room, you meet people, and you talk, and you're talking up a product. And there's a lot of manual, there's a large manual component to everything that goes on, right? There's all this technical stuff. I can't write code, but I could talk with people. And it's the same with getting your game promoted and working directly with the stores, and learning how to cooperate with them and respect some of the challenges that the stores and the social channels have. It's not like this is, China's an amazing place. If you haven't visited it, visit it. It's like it'll blow you away. people are amazing. They want to do a good job. It's not like it's this like, pirate floating around out there trying to, take you for what you have. It's just, culturally, it's different. It's, economically, it's catching up, right? They're trying to do the right thing. So they want to do a good job. It's just that I think some people, they struggle to find the right path to do that and to represent themselves in a way that represents a value to you. But I think you let your partners build that social. You want to try to go do, there's companies out there, Dragon Trail and whatnot, they'll do like, WeChat stuff for you and promote you. But I don't think it's a challenge. I've tried to deal with them directly. It's like, I'd rather just get somebody who can do it and do it really well. Sitting up here.
I mean, I think that there are baseline in social networks you need to connect with, like, you need to handle Weibo, WeChat, all that. So those things should be part of the publishing deal. That should be just, it's done thing.
Part and parcel.
And then you kind of go to the next step of, depending on the game, like what kind of game is it? How can we do marketing around it? We've done a variety of different tactics on our end, everything from physical goods to cosplay. There's a lot of different things that you can do in the marketplace that's different, including subway videos, giveaways. We've had our BD people on Crossy Road cross the streets of China, which if you've ever been there is life-threatening anyways, in a big chicken outfit, just to get a video made virally. So really, from the onset, the discussion between the two teams on the China side and the development studio should be, we both like the game, we want to do it. What are the things that we can do? And that should be the conversation that happens. That's part of the whole vetting out process of, should we go with this partner or that partner? Is the culture fit? Are we thinking about the same things, right? And then you kind of go from there. There's a lot of different things that can be done. It's not always just this one thing and this one thing.
Do we have time for another one?
Yeah, if anybody has one more pressing question.
Back there.
Hi guys, just want to hear more in details, exact number of the KPIs that you guys are looking for in games. That's it, straight up.
For us, the three things that matter is retention. So we're looking probably day one retention in the 40s, minimally, right? D7 in the mid-20s would be really, really good. Again, conversion should be 1.5 on higher, 2 is better, anything up above that. Monetization, it depends. You can have a very thin social casual game in China, and you can have 100 million people playing it, right? And it doesn't have to have a high ARPDAU, or you may have a mid-core game that is really deep vertical that needs a high ARPDAU. So it depends on the game. But those are sort of the really critical things that we look for outside of the game itself actually fitting properly inside of the China culture and gaming play patterns.
I see. Yeah.
We have that. Can we talk?
Sure. My BD guy is sitting right out there.
Yeah, and just adding to that too. So the metrics are always very important, and it always helps if the developer also has a track record and very strong understanding of their KPIs. At the same time, there's always some differences. Even bringing games from east to west and west to east, you can deliver the same title, and then those figures can also be cut in half if proper localization and adjustments aren't made appropriately. So I'd say it's always a good indicator, but I would expect additional changes and listening to your partner's feedback would really help you basically maintain those same levels or increase them moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you so much to these amazing panelists who offered their insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.